Right, hello, welcome to Sisyphus Complex Solution. This is episode 174 and it's called Sun Wars. This will become apparent as to what I'm referring to as I'm going forward, as will the fact that I'm sure that quite a few people will actually wonder what the hell this title page is, as I'll explain it as I go forward into the episode. So, as part of the continuation now going into the audit of the Ministry of Defence, the next office that I'm going to be looking at is starting with the numbers for this DSTL, which is the Defence Science and Technology Laboratory. The first thing I have to do, I suppose, for these people is to give them a little bit of congratulations for actually having produced a report for the 2023-24 period. So, that's quite a rare thing. Apart from that, focusing on the benchmark period to begin with of 2019 to 2020, and again we head in the opposite direction to expenditure, as that produced a claimed contribution of 15.9 million. It then had an average salary at 60.4k and a cost of employment at 36%. The years following that tend to show some mixed results, and aside from one other year that claims having produced a contribution, there are then 3 other years which are a taxpayer burden. This is obviously a case in that where there's absolutely no sign of any austerity at all. The staff levels have increased every year, as have the salaries that have gone up to being an average of over 70k. But they do seem to have stabilised the cost of employment at 32%. Still too high for something like this, but nevertheless. The overall operating costs have boomed somewhat. And so you're now looking at something which is costing us over £1 billion per year. So, because this is the Defence Science and Technology Laboratory, I already know damn well that the claimed revenue is just literally going to be taxpayer money, because of course it is. And so then that does lead to this the false picture in terms of their net positions. So if I take that into account, the picture then does actually in reality look quite different. And so what we're looking at in reality is this. Factually, between within the 5-year period there, and that we've gone from looking at a cost burden of between 700 million and then up towards the end of being, as I said, now over 1 billion. So that is quite a difference to them claiming, oh yes, we made 15.9 million. Well, no, you didn't, not really. So that's something that I like to present so that you will actually understand, because all you have to literally do in that is just take the revenue from government out. They claim to have other revenue, okay, fair enough, but those amounts are piddling. And so when you do look towards take that piddling amount away from your overall expenditure, that's how you get what the real picture should have actually been reported. But nevertheless, that's why I do this. Second part then, so insofar as what this organisation is all about, I'll just deal with their description first a little bit, but make some observations of my own, because I think it's needed. I tend to do it anyway, but it is needed in this particular circumstance. So, to begin with, as the name dictates, they deal with the science and technology development side, predominantly things like what they claim to be innovation, shall we say. And because this is primarily for the military, then we should be seeing things in a specific sort of direction. But because of some of the developments might prove useful in other areas of, often within like security, surveillance, that types of things, they tend to have a bit of an open door policy across 40 government offices. So They have the focus under the MOD, but don't necessarily stick to it if it does have something applicable outside of that. They do develop products, services, I suppose, in partnership with industry and academia. So this is very much like an MOD replication of the UKRI system. And this particular one has been around since 2001. Now, the key point within their responsibilities is the supply of sensitive and specialised technology, whereby most of the other stuff is largely just the usual sort of blather as per usual. Now, I do have some points to make here, which tend to be very specific to something, some certain issues that you have when you're dealing with trying to create things for the MOD specifically. And it is possible that people don't fully appreciate this. So if I then get these responsibilities out of the way, and then just think about this from a bit more of a practical perspective. So essentially, if I was to list out a few different things, I would say that you're dealing with something that is operating obviously in a limited market. Now, there are certain things, certain rare occasions where a product has wider application, but on a fundamental basis, you are dealing with something that is limited market. On the occasions that there is some sort of crossover potential, then there's another organisation that wasn't listed and that I've had to add to the list of offices underneath the Ministry of Defence. And this one is called the UK Defence Solutions. And then by the side of that, because it's kind of changed its name as they always tend to do, it's now got like a sister company, and that called the UK Defence Growth Partnership. Now, obviously, I do know about that one because I have actually worked with them personally in the past. But I'll go into the details of them when I go into their very specific audit. So they exist when you have something that is initially based around the military, or I mean, it can be sort of either way. If it's something that's been innovated within the military but then has wider industrial application, wider market application, and also indeed export potential, that's what those two organisations kind of fulfil, that type of role. And then anything from industry that might be able to fit in as well, it can feed into that picture, but not necessarily. So it does become a little bit complicated, but like I say, for the rare occasions that there is a solution laid out in place. But then what we've got to understand then is what will be produced, assuming product based now, it is generally going to be based on low volume. And so because something is going to be low volume by default, you'll also have limited scope for economies of scale. That's not something that you're generally going to be able to benefit from. Some people might turn around and say, but what about the drones and things like that? Again, this is an exception rather than the rule. Generally speaking, when you're dealing with this kind of market, these are the kinds of issues that you're coming across. What then happens as a result of that is it's a product with generally a high cost, because it's not just about paying for the product to be manufactured, which then is obviously that, because it's not going through high volume production, it will be much more expensive to produce a single unit. But you can't really operate them with a standard margin, because you do have to be able to fund your own innovation going forward. If you're doing this on a private side of things, and naturally, and that's if you've got the organisation like this DSTL, if it's all taxpayer money, somebody still has to account for it, put it that way. So it's not quite as simple as people might imagine. But then obviously when you're dealing with something that has got a limited run, low volumes, high cost, you're generally also then subject to having a limited lifespan. Now, I can probably, what I mean by limited lifespan, and that is that if you're dealing in something within, especially within a military market, I suppose, the kind of competitive nature that you're looking at, really, or kind of guesstimating, because you're never really going to fully understand. But if another military force, which is got the potential to be something that you might be coming up against, has got something that has got greater capability and capacity than what you have, then you have to be innovating forward of your own. And it sort of ends up being like a driver between the two. Can you complain and say, is that a good thing? It doesn't really matter. That's just the nature of the beast. We can argue the whys and wherefores of that sort of thing some of the time. But I can probably understand what this office is all about, and given just a little bit of time, I'll probably be able to sell this office better than they can. But it does basically fit the description that, say that there was a lot of chatter before, and that a few years ago, and that from the Dominic Cummings, who was constantly banging on about how he wanted to replicate the US's DARPA. And that then resulted in this completely unnecessary, and which I will refer back to, and that is, was it ARIA, ARIA. They're the ones that had the genius idea to block out the sun. Link in the description, and I will be coming back to that as well. But I know I've said this before, but it's been a while. So in a standard commercial environment, the expression that I was taught in Japan is that for every good idea, you'll have to reject at least 300 bad ones. So if you then added into the mixture there the low incentives to innovate in the military sector because of the kind of things that I've listed here, the number of good ideas coming through is actually going to be quite minimal. So we have to understand this more from, I suppose, like a venture capitalist mentality. What level of risk is it that you would actually be prepared to put into this, which is why it generally tends to be done inside government, not via venture capitalists. And hence why you've got initiatives like this DSTL in place. Where I would raise a bit of an eyebrow is the number of staff that they have within this, and the fact that it keeps expanding, because it ended up with being over 5,000. Now, I'll be looking shortly, but I highly doubt the path to military innovation is going to be based on a government-run organisation, at least to that larger degree, and also in terms of anticipating that the innovation is going to be coming from the in-house. That's not really what I would expect to take place. I can see them having relevance in terms of testing and creating prototypes, things of this nature. But in general, the ideas, I wouldn't necessarily expect that to come from in-house as such. So in case it did kind of pass you by, the one thing I've never really banged on about, because I have on a number of occasions mentioned various different agenda and things like that, but I've never really banged on about this, the one side of things which does reach a lot of ears, is that the military industrial complex. I'm less convinced of that particular type of claim that is often made, and I certainly don't buy it on the basis of them having to do that in order to be able to sustain profits, because I think an awful lot of people that do go on about that side of things, and that probably have quite a lack of understanding as to how much it takes to develop any kind of product within the military. So for certain large firms to hold the ability to be able to create some of the most critical defence systems, and to be able to keep producing with some level of relative consistency. It's no easy task, and it certainly does not mean that it is done on the basis of being dependent on fighting another war. The war that they're fighting is who has got the best shit. That's the fundamental of it. So anyway, the key to this office will be its output, and so I mean the principle of why we have the office, I can pretty much explain, even if only to myself, why it exists. But as with all things and always, it depends on what it is that they actually deliver that matters. So that's kind of what we need to be looking at next. And in this particular situation, I'm going to have to light up because, yeah, we do have some situations here. So basically, what I can start with here and on this particular screenshot, this comes from a document that you can download yourself. I think I've put a link in the description for it. And this is a list of all of their published research. And there are 1,982 of them on this particular list. Now, obviously there are some examples within this, and I dare say you can even see it on the screen at the moment. There's some of them where you're thinking, okay, I can see some level of relevance here. But there are some examples that, yeah. I'm not going to put the links in the description to what I'm about to show you, and that because if you do download the document yourself, literally every project that they have has got the link by the side of each specific project, so you can knock yourself out with that one. So to give you some ideas as what's included within this. We should all countries should parrot the MPOX because racism. That's a worthwhile output, isn't it? And there's actually quite a lot of papers inside this spreadsheet around the MPOX, which does make me wonder a little bit. Next example, the second one. Do dogs recognise meaningless phrases? Okay. Third example. We're going to sit there and watch a family of marmosets. Doing well, doing well. Fourth example. Identifying the behaviours of people that do illegal fishing. Okay. Let's just do one more example because it would be irritating to do any more. So the fifth and final one, and though by no means the end of some questionable undertakings. Developing a framework to understand that which mankind has understood since Adam and Eve, which is that men and women are different. Okay. Apparently, this particular sort of innovation-based office, supposedly for military purposes, have either become or have had to pretend to become retarded leftists that don't know basics like men and women's bodies being different and that. So are they pretending to be inclusive? It's open to question, quite frankly. I mean, are there some actual legitimate studies? You know, I don't know. I don't know if I would actually like it to be called studies. I don't really think that that's something they should be doing. It should be concentrated on the product testing, production, that kind of thing, rather than just studying it. Um, so, are there some legitimate studies? To some degree, yes. But when you have idiocy like this thrown in, we're potentially in the exact kind of problem that always happens when you let government stick their nose in to spank our money on a bunch of useless individuals and their useless ideologies. Or did I say useful? I'm sure I said useful individuals. It's definitely, according to the little script of notes I've got as well, useless individuals and their useless ideologies. So there you go. I have to make sure I get that right. This does then lead to my sort of consideration as to what we'd actually do with an organisation like this. It does lead to the question as to whether we do actually need those over 5,000 people in this organisation, because if this stuff is what they actually do, and if they're serious about this, then that would be an absolutely 100% clear, resounding no. So we've got some bad points to be considering here. Then let's get into what they want people to focus on through the kinds of projects that they put out on their front page, rather than the drivel that can be found in the wider project. Now, one of these catches my eye straight away because it's this sixth operating in the future electromagnetic environment, OFEME, symposium from the 18th to the 20th of November 2025 in Newport, Wales. That's where this picture at the beginning comes from. The first thing I have to note about that is because it's going to be the sixth symposium, exhibition, event, call it what you will. That means that once again, we've had something that first took place during 2020, when everybody was supposedly completely distracted with the coronavirus. Unusual timing once again. Now, when you're considering this electromagnetic environment, as much as I'm sure that it is to a relative degree inside the blurb around this, but certainly in terms of wider discussions and how it's presented to the public, this will be wrapped up in the sort of delusional rhetoric of an attack by the world's Mr. Evil, the Mr. Meanie, Putin. But let's just be quite clear as to what we're referring to when we're using the term electromagnetic environment. Because in this instance, we're talking about Earth's magnetic field. So the problem at hand, I don't think has got anything to do with some sort of prospective Dr. Evil, with his laser, and that will then conveniently double up as some kind of Matrix-style EMP weapon. EMP meaning electromagnetic pulse. I don't think we're talking about something that is about a potential weapon that we have to be concerned about, that will then take out our energy systems and all of our electronics and wider issues like that. I think this is actually focused towards a natural event. that particular article comes from 2017. Now, the natural event itself is what is known as a geomagnetic storm or a solar storm. And I do think that this is by far more likely to be something that, because I mean, even by now, I think it's become a wide enough known potential issue amongst the, even just sort of like the wider public's peripheral knowledge. I think people do kind of understand this by now. So hopefully I shouldn't really need to explain it too much, but if you really don't know what I'm talking about with this sort of thing, then just have a look at there's a link in the description for the article, if you're on Rumble, that is, and that will give you an idea as to what we're talking about. Now, what I will do then is say that it might be worth people thinking, let's just, if you put that together with the chemtrail argument, everything that is claimed with the chemtrail argument, where, you know, we know it's happening despite all of the claims to the opposite, but let's put that to one side because of so many people turning around and going, oh, you know, they're trying to poison us all and all that sort of stuff. I'm not quite so convinced about that, but if you then think back to what I mentioned about Dominic Cummings and that area, or Araya project, where they're also looking towards reflecting the sun. This comes directly from an article again discussing what it is that that particular organisation is looking to do. What we have to understand with this as a basis is that the climate hard narrative doesn't actually include the sun. It might sound unusual for anybody that, again, isn't familiar with that sort of thing, but all of their models and so forth doesn't actually include the sun. So their entire guff is based on the greenhouse gases. So if you just think logically about this, if their plan is to prevent something that they haven't even blamed for the so-called claimed rise in temperature, which isn't actually happening anyway, and then you look to block out something from coming in, so you're blocking the sun's rays from coming in, well then when you do that, by default you'll be trapping the gases in, which is what they're claiming is causing their made-up problem. So then this wouldn't make any sense, would it? This would literally do the opposite of what they're blaming and then what they're intending to create as a solution. I mean, you're basically trying to remove the feedback loop for a start off, as you know, and then add in all of the stuff and that is the much wider false rhetoric around this. This would do the exact opposite of any claims around that. Like I said, when it comes down to this the spraying from the planes and the chemtrails and all that sort of stuff, and you know, they're poisoning us, there is a potential that there would be secondary consequences from something like that. And I'm not 100% convinced that even they are that stupid, unless there was some sort of correlation or consideration or trade-off, shall we say, to say, well, yes, if we do this, there is a potential that over the long term there could be some issues around people's health because of what has been sprayed, whether it be from the boats, apparently they want to do it from boats, or from planes. Now, I get the feeling then of, because of what they're doing of trying to block the sun, I think they're actually doing this in order to be able to, or I'm going to propose at least, that this is actually much more about defences against solar events. I've not really seen many people discussing this. And like I said, I mean, feel free to disagree. It's, you know, it's absolutely fine. Um, it makes no sense to me that they would be doing something like this for the reasons that they're claiming. And yet, because like with the article itself and that from 2017, it is something that we know about. And it could be this situation whereby, you know, we can have various considerations around this, because I mean, if we were saying they're doing it for different reasons so that you don't scare people, well, they're using a doomsday excuse to be able to then do that, which would kind of be a bit illogical. But because people are really not that stupid anyway, and by far in the majority, people know that the doomsday excuse that they're using of the climate, it's never caused a panic because nobody really believes it, and for good reason. Um, but could they be doing that in order to cover over something that would actually be a proper sort of doomsday scenario? That kind of situation does make me sort of consider what are they actually doing here. I mean, it can be difficult because the people that are surrounding all of this, I know that there's an awful lot of really really stupid people, kind of like with those examples that I gave in terms of those bits of research, and even just within this office. But you'd kind of suspect that not everybody's a total retard, wouldn't you? And so for them to be having this event, this operating in the future electromagnetic environment, and to have that being created via a military focused organisation like this, I do have to wonder whether there are some few people that might not be completely off their heads, and that can be sort of relied on a little bit more than the ones that are so vehemently and obviously ideologically charged. Um, if this was something that they were doing in terms of being able to prevent solar, you know, the impact of a solar event, then I dare say a lot of people would say, like, you know, okay, this actually might be an argument that holds merit. Um, but how hard would it be for them to make that case without everybody assuming that it's the as per usual sort of problem reaction solution type situation? Because I mean, obviously, even when you do have something that might, even if my wildest imagination here and that saying that this is definitely what they're doing, because I don't know that that's what they're doing, it just seems to make sense to me. Even if it was legitimate, you're still then going to have other people underneath it that will still install a problem reaction solution situation to push whatever lunatic agenda it is that they've got. So I mean, you're damned if you do and damned if you don't. But at the same time, in order to be able, if they were doing something like this for legitimate reasons, or as best possible in terms of a trade-off, and they wanted to be able to hide the financing behind this, then again, is it possible that they're saying, you know, just create whatever papers they can whatever research you think it is that we can get away with, so then we can put funding towards something like this and just distract everybody. And then you've got that group of 5,000 going, okay, there's only a certain amount of mildly serious looking stuff that we can put out there. So how about we just create some joke papers, because the leftards will love that. It's entirely possible. That way then, you know, you get your finances fed through to do this kind of thing. So I could be being incredibly generous here in terms of giving a plausible explanation as to what they're actually doing. But you know, sometimes, I mean, in general, I am really quite negative about practically every government office that I come across. But when there is something that it the explanations that are given that just do not add up at all, and then the understanding that you do know that they will be doing certain things that they don't really want you to know about, because something that would actually have a real sort of panic scenario behind it. So, you know, if we did have a massive world scale Carrington event, because that's the thing to look towards really, and that for the example, and considering the amount of dependency everybody has got on all of their electronic devices, I think that sort of thing would cause more of an issue than climate. So I'm just trying to give them at least some sort of possible situation to say that they might not all be completely fucking mental. Because otherwise, if it is literally to do with this climate stuff, they're doing the exact, like I said, they're doing the exact opposite of what they're claiming they're going to be doing. So it's just a thought anyway. But there's another one on their front pages of their projects that they would rather we focus on, which again kind of feeds into the potential of what I'm saying, because they've also then got this project called Orpheus, where, as you can tell from the main highlight statement that they have, it's in regard to space weather. Well, that's solar events then, isn't it? Now, in terms of what they claim that these satellites that are going to be put up, I mean, not until 2027, so they can't be that urgent. But in terms of the payloads that they have up there, it does mean that they have the intention to, you know, have a few different systems. But the fact is, they'll certainly be having systems on board, such as the radiation monitor, which is very specific towards checking on solar events. Now, in case there's any sort of uncertainty of just looking at the this base information on here and what it is that they mean when they're referring to things like the ionosphere, here's a little guide for that. It is, again, very much covering the areas where there would be a focus towards solar events, not just climate. And like I say, this inclusion of the radiation monitor, it just gives more fuel to the fire of the potential that is exactly what they're paying attention to. So if you can consider that there are a few systems that are running sort of in parallel, it does mean that I think we might be looking at situations here and that projects are being undertaken that maybe we should be better informed about, if they would be prepared to do that. And maybe we don't necessarily need to be thinking that all of these things are based on the entire, like I say, that military industrial complex type mentality of saying everybody's in destroy mode all the time. They want to kill everybody all the time. I mean, there's enough nutters out there that do want to do that sort of thing. I mean, see the latest lunacy that we've got here and that with the communist jihadi party. Those are things that you need to worry about as far as that's concerned. But stuff like this, like I said, I think there are potential ulterior motives which are not quite as nefarious as people tend to suggest. Could be just me, but why not put it out there? It's about time, I think, that we actually did have something that might have actual positive intentions behind it for once. So, in terms of state of play, after this particular organisation, funded organisation, the two that we've covered so far and that both claim a net position, of course they do. And because I can demonstrate how that isn't actually quite true, if I was to add the true positions, the two actual positions that can be established from their reports, and put those numbers together, I mean, as I'm going forward now, I'll still be maintaining the use of the figures that they claim, but still, just so that you understand, in reality, we'd be looking at these two offices costing the taxpayer basically £711.5 million. That would be a more true representation. So in terms of policies, now based on what this office could be, I'm literally just going to put it in the review and reform column. And I would look to be going in there and stripping out all of the more retarded nonsense and those silly papers. And it may well result in downsizing the staff considerably, because again, with something like this, and that you want them to concentrate on the actual job, putting out peer-reviewed papers, couldn't care less. That's not what this is about. If it was run properly, there is a potential then to also consider this from an IP perspective as well. And if you deal with things on that basis, it most likely, again, because we're talking about low market volumes and that, it probably wouldn't have massive potential. But you might be able to look towards generating something that could actually help towards a net contribution. Above all, though, I know full well that there will be projects of importance that are undertaken here, and it would be naive to think that absolutely everything in a situation like this needs to be interfered with to such an extent that you defeat the whole purpose. What you have to actually be looking towards doing that is bringing the purpose back, get the focus correct, and then consider precisely what it is that you could or should be discussing in the public domain, rather than doing projects that are somewhat odd, to say the least. Now, the next little bit that I'm going to bring up here is that, and this is actually probably more for me than you, to be honest, but I've got this calendar into this presentation because this is the schedule that I've got going forward. So I mean, I've got July 25th highlighted there, which is today that of me doing this recording. And then basically what's going to happen now is that I won't be producing or publishing another episode until at best September the 12th. And the reason for that is because I will be away. So that basically does mean a 6-week absence. And as I'm sure that you'll be able to cope without me, and you know, those of you that are new to the channel, it's not as if you've got a shortage of other videos for you to catch up on. Basically what I want to do is just give this advance notice of what at least I'm going to be trying to do during this break, because essentially I am going to start putting some of the the stuff together and that, and updating some of it from the processes that I've covered so far, and start putting this all down on paper. And because of the amount of work that I've already done so far, and that's over what is the best part of 5 years now, it won't be possible for me to put an entire sort of here's what I've found and here's all the solutions prospect together in some kind of single publication. And even if I could, I certainly wouldn't be able to get that much done in 6 weeks. But what I do have is the potential to be able to either look towards a kind of a first volume, or what would be much more likely is to be able to produce chapters, so that it can then just sort of be put out there for you to be able to understand this entire process that I've been running, and how it can be, including how it can be applied in other nations as well. And then just sort of put them out there as PDFs, and then you read through it as and when you see fit, and then we'll sort of see how it goes from there. Exactly how many chapters, or if I could do a full volume, am I going to be able to achieve that in the 6-week period, because I have other things to do as well? I don't know. We'll see what I've got when I come back. But that's basically the intention that I've got. So, aside from that, I think after the first episode that I do when I come back on the 12th of September, and then published on the 13th, likely. A couple of days after that, then it'll be once again time for another population update, and that would be generally speaking, the one where you get some interesting data in terms of that up-down cycle that tends to have come out over the last couple of years in particular. So, apart from that, I know that there's obviously lots now taking place within the UK, and lots of potential, and lots of people talking about a summer of unrest. If there is going to be any kind of unrest in the UK, I'm not going to waste my time anymore saying, oh, stay at home, don't do anything, or blah blah, all that sort of stuff, because it is obvious that people have had more than enough. But something that I had pointed out to certain people online earlier on this week: understand numbers. If you're going to do anything at all, understand numbers, would be my main piece of advice. So when you've got things like you've had the thing out in Epping, where you've then had forces from various locations turning up. Then you've had the stuff out in like around Canary Wharf area. Again, various forces turning out. Well, if you keep in mind that there's under 250,000 police in this country, and there's an awful lot of hotels in this country that are spread around, you would be able to minimise the presence that would be seeking to act against your will, shall we say. And in such a situation, I say the advantage there would be is that a limited force against you would then be less inclined to being antagonistic. And so all you need to do then is very much let your feelings be known. You don't have to instigate anything at all at that point, because you know you'll be relatively safe. There won't be enough of them to be able to come at you. Is it likely that once again they will start shipping in the brown shirts again, your far leftists. That's possible. I think it would only take one or two incidents and that for that to come to a halt quite quickly, because they don't exactly bring their best, do they? On account of the fact that none of them are the best at anything. I understand that the football lads, on a wider scale now, not just the ones that are associated with Tommy, I understand that the wider football family are considering friendships, shall we say. And again, with those fellas, keep it calm. Only push back when you're forced to. But if the football lads are going to get involved, and because you do have your own, obviously your own sort of territorial stance anyway, you'd be able to deal with things in your own areas. You don't necessarily all have to come together. If there is one big event, like, I mean, obviously September the 13th, which I will be here for, but on that sort of an occasion, yeah, you might all be able to come together for something like that. But in terms of this so-called summer of unrest, you can limit any potential arguments between football clubs and that by just like that sensible dispersal, which then has the advantage of, like I said, spreads the police thin. Think about things properly. You don't have to be going out and having a full-on punch-up. Just having the presence on the streets is going to be enough. And they really hate it when everybody is out on the streets and not falling into the traps. They absolutely hate that. Because they can call you all the names under the sun. It won't make a blind bit of bloody difference. That's something to be thinking about. And something to spread the word about. Because once you've got something like that going, then you can also start looking towards more practical solutions that things like I have been saying for I don't know how long now, like in terms of if everybody really doesn't like the way things are running, which they clearly don't, there are methods of being able to do something about it within the actual system that we have. I'll relay again, and that to say that code of conduct for people in public office. You can pile the pressure on for things like this. You could even potentially, with a large enough pushback, as in a physical presence on the streets, there is also potential in that to sort of government wobbles and fails. If you do use that code of conduct as well, that's to help push them over the edge. Yeah, you might end up with a situation where you can get a general election and get these buggers out. But also then being very, very sure to make sure everybody understands that you don't then vote in communist jihadis. And you don't also have to rely on Reform and Nigel Farage either. That's another thing that I've been banging on and on about. And I will say it again because this is the last episode that I'm going to be doing for 6 weeks. You can find a competent independent amongst your own, and then have the people from within your own constituencies to provide them with the support for any areas where they've got shortfalls. Provide the expertise. You don't have to be a member of a party. You just need the support behind you to be able to actually be a representative for the people rather than for God knows who else. And then when I come back and I start to produce my work on paper, I mean, you can always go through the videos and find out a lot of this stuff anyway. But there are things that we can do. We don't have to go into mental destroy mode under any circumstances. We can change this, we can turn it around, and we can do exactly the things that we think we can do. There are means and ways for doing this. So, obviously I'll have access to any comments or anything like that if anybody wants to have any questions, whether it be to do with what I've been covering in the episodes, or whether it's how do we stop the place falling apart. Whatever it is, I can actually provide some answers to these things. I don't have to wait for Nigel Farage, Rupert Lowe, Ben Habib, or anybody else. I probably know the state of government better than all of them. So it might sound like a brag, but the simple fact of the matter is, my entire channel is based on auditing government, understanding what each office actually does, understanding who the people are, what the influences are. Yes, I know more about them than they know more about it than they do. It's just a simple fact. The end solution, that's very much a much wider conversation. I can make some suggestions and that, but I certainly don't want to be telling people what to do, because then that goes straight back to the same old problems. That's more in everybody's court than in mine. I can make some suggestions. What you do with it from there, entirely up to you. But the general point is there are things that we can do. That's the one thing that, despite the fact that I get really irritated a lot of times when I'm doing these videos, I can always see something that says, this is how we could deal with it. And it's not as complicated as a lot of people like to try to make out. So, on that basis, I will see you in 6 weeks' time. Keep it positive. Don't let the bastards get you down. Don't let them push you in a direction that you really don't need to go in. We are on the winning side. We are doing things the right way. Let's keep it that way. All right, cheers. Take care now. Bye-bye and good luck.